So, got the new microphone. Got
Yeah.
Got it up and going.
Hopefully people can actually hear us now.
Yeah, we should sound a little clearer.
And you shouldn't have to crank your stereo up to maximum volume.
You can if you want.
Yeah,
It's
I
up to
mean,
you.
it's got to be like a rock album, right?
We will warn you if you're going to do that. We got some pretty new fire intro music, so
Yes.
you're going to want to turn it up for that.
I have absolutely no musical talent, and I created this using GarageBand.
Full disclosure, we think it sounds good. If you guys don't think so, please don't tell us. If you like it, let us know.
We're fragile boys. We have low self-esteem.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
All right, somebody once told me the world was going to roll me. I ain't the sharpest tool in the shed.
Hey, everybody. We're coming to you from the recording studio, a.k.a. Aaron's basement.
You know, it feels like a recording studio now. We moved the turntable out of the basement upstairs. We got our own little space down here now.
Proper placement.
Feeling good.
Yeah. So I'm James Dorn, and with me, as always, the man who knows how to stop, drop, shut him down, and open up shop. The guy who always knows how to go hard and get busy with it, Aaron Rohde.
R.I.P. DMX.
Yeah, DMX died. How about that?
DMX, Shock G.
A.K.A. Humpty Hump.
Yeah, the
Digital.
hip-hop game is hurting right now.
We lost an OG and DMX. I can't call DMX an OG. I'm sorry.
Some people would, but I don't know if I would either.
I don't know. And for those of you who aren't into rap, we also lost Les McEwen of the Bay City Rollers at age 65, all on the same day.
All these guys very young, too.
Yeah. So, I would say DMX had quite a colorful life.
Yeah, he was a guy, that's for sure.
So, I happened to do a little bit of digging and found some interesting moments, the DMX highlight reel, as it were. So, I think probably one of my favorite ones is back in 2000, DMX knocked a woman up that was not his wife. Do you think he handled that respectfully, or do you think he made excuses?
I don't think he ever really handled anything respectfully.
Yeah, he actually went as far as to accuse the woman of raping him. Classy guy.
I also want to say this guy became a pastor later in life as well.
So he did. So
made
hopefully,
quite the 180.
Yeah, but becoming a pastor is not fun. Let's talk about some of his other moments. There is a interesting quote which I'll let you guys read on your own, just because there are far too many expletives for me to go over this. When he was asked about Barack Obama.
I can only imagine what that one
Oh,
says.
yeah, there's a lot of F-bombs and making fun of him and a lot of inappropriate stuff. How about impersonating a federal agent back in 2004?
Yeah, I can't say that's anything I'd ever do.
He crashed his SUV into a secured gate at the JFK airport because he wanted to avoid paying a $9 toll. When security rushed up to him, he told them to leave him alone, and because he was a federal agent.
I don't even know what to say about that. Like, if $9 is that important to you, I don't know.
So then in 2004, less than a week later, after pleading guilty for the incident I just mentioned, he had his license suspended, and he was arrested again for doing 104 miles an hour in a 65 zone in North Castle, New York.
That one might be my favorite.
That man knew how to live large. Then in 2005, while his license was still suspended, DMX was caught driving an SUV and slammed it into a car and then smashed into a police car. But that's okay, because he's a federal agent.
And he had no license.
In 1999, he was scheduled to perform at the MTV VMAs, but he just didn't show up for any of the rehearsals and ended up not showing up for the awards, period. Jay-Z ended up having his set extended to fill the time. Just an absolute...
That is just ridiculous.
Class act all across the board. And I'm sure that this is just a fraction of the wonderful things DMX happened to do in his
book
time.
that performance and not show up is career ending for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, props to
My
Jay-Z
God.
for, just rolling with it.
That's frustrating.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. All right, so we got some additional educational things. We're going to kind of mix things up and talk about two different topics. So, full disclosure, this was spawned off of a recent purchase of mine. So, Aaron, what do you know about stereo and mono?
Not a ton, truthfully. You and I have kind of talked about this in the past, and from what I gathered, mono is basically throwing all the sound at you at once through one speaker, and stereo is recorded in a way that you can kind of manipulate the sounds and make it do what you want it to do through different speakers or headsets or things like that.
Absolutely. So, it is both a recording process and a pressing process. And we'll try to keep this simple because we're not going to go into the nitty-gritty of mixing and recording, etc., etc. So just think about the microphone that you're using when you're recording with your band as a channel. So originally, you'd have all of the band's members just all in a room together with one single microphone directly in the center of the room. This is a very old school thing, and you may have seen it in like some of the movies with like Elvis in them when he's recording and everybody's just hanging out. So that is true mono. More modern times, what we have is, think about each drum, each vocalist, each singer, each guitar, bass player, they all have their own microphone or channel. When this is all mixed and kind of put together, they take all of these sounds and they just put it right in the middle. We're not having anything be accented over the top. Nothing pops as a main focus. And this is how music was largely recorded in the 50s and most of the 60s. Actually, stereo was much considered to be a novelty. Many of the bands, like the Beatles and so on, would record most of their albums in mono, and they'd be present for it, and they'd be involved in the mix. And it wasn't until later when the engineers would actually come in and they would do the stereo mixes, really however they wanted.
Now, for those of you who have seen the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, you can kind of think of when Queen is recording their album at the vacation home or wherever they are, where they're out in the country, and each person goes into the studio individually and kind of records a section, and then it gets layered on top of it. That's kind of what a stereo recording would be.
Absolutely. It really wasn't until the late 60s when these engineers who had been doing their entire careers recording in mono started to play with things. One of the most notable ones was actually George Martin of the Beatles. He was the one that kind of sat down and kind of realized a lot of what you could do with this. So, for example, talking about the White Album and Sgt. Pepper, you may have heard things like the rooster going off or the orchestra tuning up, and you probably are familiar with the sounds of the stereo version of this mix. Mm-hmm. However, if you listen to the mono recordings, it's a very different sounding album. And originally the monos were cheaper. Stereo was a fad. A lot of the stereos were actually set up to ideally play mono. So as time went by, more and more bands started going with stereo. And stereo was kind of designed to emulate a live experience. So when you're sitting in front of a band that's playing, you're going to hear, the guitar playing more over here, or in the case of how this originally came about, the orchestra, you'd hear the horns and the trumpets, and at different times they would kind of pop and they'd be coming at you from different directions. You don't get that with mono. Mono is directly in front of you. Everything's equal. Everything's the same. That's not to say mono doesn't sound good. A lot of people prefer it because it sounds like it's got more of a punch to it and more of a pop. So I recently purchased Jimi Hendrix Are You Experienced from Armando on the Second Chance Records, and I had listened to this album many times on CD over the years, many, many times. I was actually blown away and felt like I was listening to it the first time, probably because it was played to me in the manner in which it was recorded.
Right. And a lot of people say the same thing about the Beatles' White Album as well, that the mono sound just kind of hits you different.
Yeah. I was told, from what I've been reading, it's a very unique experience. I did have a friend who was a hardcore Beatles collector, and he would never, ever buy Beatles on stereo. Mm-hmm. That being said, too, like in the 50s and late 60s, mono was being made less and less. So a lot of times the mono recordings are actually more rare and more valuable. And kind of a big shout out to Germany. Germany was probably the first country that really started to phase out mono. They just went full stereo.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
All right, so the other topic we're going to talk about today is kind of the import record side of things, and some maybe misconceptions or just some information about those. These records are records that are not pressed in the U.S. They're pressed either in Europe, South America, wherever, and they're brought in. Our local record store does have a small imported records section.
A lot of them are different colors that we've never seen these records on.
My copy of AC/DC Back in Black was an import, and it's on purple vinyl.
And I have a copy of Kiss's Love Gun, which is kind of like a blue and white marble that I bought from there.
So some of these records do have a little bit more appeal to those who like the colored vinyl. I know I usually dig through that section.
I also think
to see what's there.
I also think that sometimes you see records that aren't being pressed in the United States anymore. Mm-hmm. Like one example of that's Stone Temple Pilots' core album. Like I could go to the exclusive company where our local store, and I could go get a copy of that. But if I wanted to find like a regular old black copy, I would actually be really hard pressed to go on even Amazon or Target or any of those and find that album.
And if you find it, it's probably going to be pretty pricey too.
Agreed.
The other one that I kind of dig through there for are a lot of like underground hip hop artists will kind of release their stuff under their own label or their own company, and a lot of those are found in that import section. Most notably is Chance the Rapper. He doesn't release any of his music physically to the general public. He releases it all for free on streaming services, so that's where I found the one Chance the Rapper record that I have. So one thing to note for these records, these imported records, are that many of them are thought to be unofficial releases or bootlegs.
That was actually with that Kiss record. When I got it home and I tried to look it up on Discogs, the closest thing I could find was a blue color, and it wasn't the same color blue, and it was listed as an unofficial. So I'm like, did I just buy a bootleg?
Right. So this could turn some people away, and we're not saying that there's anything wrong with buying these records. They still sound okay for the most part. They still play well. They won't typically damage your table or anything. But if you're looking into the collectability and the value side of things, these might be one to stay away from.
Right. Also, too, you don't know what the source of the content is from. So say you're buying an American rock band, and the pressing that you're buying is from Japan or Germany or the England. Chances are it's probably not from the master tapes.
Right. And if it's not from the master tapes, the sound quality isn't going to be the same.
No, absolutely not. There's definitely some varying quality with that. So, like my Kiss records from the UK, and after listening to it, I have listened to that album in the past. I would agree that I don't think the sound quality is 100%.
Right.
So, buyer beware.
Right. And then after doing a little more digging, I kind of found out that the term import in today's records doesn't really mean a whole lot. Now there is a lot more of pressing records in different countries, but back in like the 70s and 80s, this wasn't the case, and imported records would actually run a higher price than a U.S. pressing. Now this was thought because, like the UK, their quality of materials of recording for bands like Pink Floyd was better than what we had in the U.S. So those UK pressed records would actually go for more than a U.S. pressed record.
And I'm sure the Beatles are likely the same with the original run. If you found a mono copy pressed in the UK,
as long as it was pressed off of the master recording.
Right. I would imagine those are probably far more valuable than a American copy from the 60s.
And they probably sound a little bit better, too.
Oh, I don't doubt that one bit. There are some other differences, too. I know that Japan, for example, has a very, very different mixing and recording process. Mm-hmm. There are some people who really prefer the Japanese sound just because of how they're mixed. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, and I may be wrong about this, like the Mo-Fi master recordings, like the copy of the Weezer The Green album I have, was definitely sounds a little bit different. I like it. I like it a lot. And I believe those are made with a special process in Japan as well.
I believe so from the research that I found. I believe you're right on that.
Yeah.
Now, for like the hip-hop world, this is kind of like the mixtape days back in the 90s and early 2000s, where people would do their unofficial mixtapes and release them on cassette or CD or whatever, and just kind of get their stuff out there instead of doing an album, because that could take upwards of a year and a half or 2 years.
Is this where we'd have like the guy hustling on the corner handing out his cassette tapes?
Essentially, yeah. That's kind of what it's like. So this is kind of, the import section is kind of the keeping the underground music scene going, essentially. At least for vinyl records, and as far as that's concerned. So like we said, there's nothing wrong with buying imported records if you dig their sound, their feel, their color, whatever it may be. If that's the only way to get a certain record or album, go for it. It's not harmful to do your research before you just go ahead and buy exclusively imported records.
So again, like we've often said, it's however you choose to collect.
Yeah. And if you're not into flipping records, buying and flipping, these records may be for you.
Which, again, Aaron and I would never flip records.
No.
We're not into flipping. We like people to have the records they want at a reasonable price.
Trading, we'll do trades, but flipping is not in our end game.
Correct.
All right, should we hit reviews?
Yeah, let's do it. You want to go first?
I think you should go first.
I should go first.
Mine's a little more of a heavy hitter, I think.
Sounds good. So, Aaron, what was the name of the record you gave me? It was VF.
It was Perception.
Perception. Yep, that's what I thought. So I prepared my review ahead of time just because I know that this is one of Aaron's favorite musicians, so I wanted to give it the proper due.
He is a guy that I've been listening to probably for 6-7 years now. I think I own all of his albums now.
So let me take you back. The year was 2000 something. It was probably close to 2001. I was around the age of 19 and had just finished high school not that long before that. I was working a minimum wage data entry job auditing over-the-road truck drivers' logs. At this point, I would describe where I was musically as firmly stuck pre-1979, and I had no intention of ever leaving my music safe space. You see, rap rock had been ruling the music scene for a few years at this point. And yes, folks, I'm talking about Limp Bizkit and Kid Rock. We were allowed to listen to CDs on a Walkman while we plunked away on our keyboards. This was in fact about the only thing that kept me awake most days. I had the pleasure of working with another guy named Dave, and Dave and I had very different musical tastes. Well, you see, most days I would be listening to bands like Oasis, Kiss, Golden Earring, and The Doors. He would be listening to Eminem, Dr. Dre, and Snoop. And also D'Angelo, which I hadn't heard of prior. The work was so ungodly boring that the music was a lot of what kept us going, along with the caffeine and the sugar that I was ingesting in copious amounts. So Dave and I began borrowing CDs from each other. To say I was a little skeptical about listening to rap at this point would be an understatement. So sparing you my opinions on these other musicians, I will stick with Eminem. The first thing that caught me was his almost cartoonish voice and crazy over-the-top lyrics. This was probably my first experience with a white rapper besides Vanilla Ice. The dude was super angry and openly talked about killing his ex and his mom. Being 19 and having some mommy issues of my own at this point, this appealed to me. It also didn't hurt. My long-term high school girlfriend had recently cheated on me. Now, let me be clear. I never wanted to kill either of these people, but this music definitely helped me process some of the feelings that I was going through and was a good source of me venting and dealing with them. So how does this relate to my review of NF's 2017 album Perception? Well, when I put this on the table, I immediately felt familiar to me. Hailing from Gladwin, Michigan, NF, or as he's probably known in his hometown, Nathan John Feuerstein, openly cites Eminem as his primary influence in hip-hop. That's not to say he didn't have his own traumas growing up, including but not limited to his mother dying of a drug overdose in 2009. So musically, I wouldn't have been surprised to find out this was actually an Eminem album based on what I was hearing as far as the audio portion goes. From the second the needle hits the record, you are bombarded with moody, dark beats similar to Eminem's first two albums. For me, it felt like a ride that didn't end until the second LP was back in its sleeve. Honestly, I have very little negative to say about the arrangement and the quality. This album is deep, dark, and it has something you enjoy. If that's something you enjoy, you won't be disappointed. When it comes to skill and technique of rapping, I think NF holds his own. When he gets going, he doesn't let up. I was surprised at times I didn't hear him take a huge gasp of air. As far as the content of his lyrics go, I did find myself getting distracted at times. He covers a wide variety of content with many reoccurring themes. In his verses, he mentions various insecurities in his personal life, his professional life, and just in his head in general. It seems like he feels a lot of pressure to produce an album at the caliber of his previous albums. At times it sounds like he's also taking issue with someone in particular, but he never really says who. These are all great subject matters for songs, however, he tends to jump back and forth mid-song. On top of this, it also seems like he falls subject to a rap stereotype. He spends a lot of time talking about how wonderful he is and how great he is. And I don't know much about NF and as a person or how he tries to style his albums, but I would say I don't feel he demonstrates a lot of versatility in this album. I feel like he would benefit from a collaborative approach with other rappers and producers. I feel rap is a great medium. Some of the best albums come out of collaboration. One other element to him I wanted to mention, he doesn't swear. In fact, his first label is actually the Capital Christian Group in 2014. So don't let that turn you off. He doesn't talk about religion in his music. He isn't rapping about God. He still has an edge and aggression that reminds you of a Midwest inner city vibe like Eminem first showed us. So the question we always ask ourselves is, when we review these albums, would I have bought this for myself? Probably not. To put things simple in terms, rap is a weak area for me. This, coupled with how picky I am, I generally don't take risks on albums. I don't know how often I'm willing to take these chances unless I get a good deal on them. I do enjoy good rap, and from time to time, and I won't lie, the album probably won't make it into my heavy rotation, but it is good, and I would recommend it to someone looking for rap that they wouldn't need to turn down if your grandma was downstairs.
I like that part of it. I know this isn't an area that you typically listen to, and I know you've had bad experiences, most notably ODB.
ODB, yeah, ODB was not a good choice.
And I kind of
nothing against him. When he started rapping about period blood, that just kind of
Yeah,
I lost
that's
it.
just kind of up and over the line that we don't like to cross
Yeah.
too much. So I figured
But
this
that
would be a
same-
good intro for this one.
That same trip though, I bought Fuji's, and I like the
So it was
Fuji's.
worth it.
I do enjoy that Fuji's album.
Yeah, it's a little intro to something that you may not be as comfortable with.
Yeah,
So for my review, James got me Dark Side of the Moon. Any fan of music, whether you're a casual listener or a hardcore music buff, knows that this album is widely regarded as one of the best of all time. Not just rock, but album in general.
I would struggle to find someone who collects vinyl from a certain age that would not think this is one of the best albums ever made.
Yeah. So I was actually gifted a set of coasters. I don't remember if it was my birthday or Valentine's Day. And it was a set of 5 coasters with iconic album covers on them. Dark Side was one of them. Along with Queen. There's an Elvis one. I don't remember the other ones. But, so that's what we'll say about that. I'm a little embarrassed as a music fan to say that I had never listened to this album, but I will admit it. I don't like to hide things.
Aaron had been with me when I bought The Wall, and he shared with me he really had never listened to Pink Floyd, and I was like, well, we got to fix that.
and we all know, James and I have kind of talked about this before, this era of music is something that I kind of lack knowledge of. Not that I don't appreciate it, I just don't know much of it. That being said, I had no idea what to expect when I first listened to the album, other than that it is widely known as one of the best of all time. So when I first started, I was kind of surprised. I didn't expect a lot of the music to be sound effect-like as it is, and it just kind of felt like you were in the middle of a movie the whole time. There were loud explosions, crashes, and things like that. A lot of little laughs here and there as well that if you turn it up, you can kind of hear in the background.
An auditory assault.
Yeah, right. So this is one album that kind of makes me wish that my turntable had a headphone jack that I could use to capture all of the sounds that are going on.
I have recent days have had a very similar feeling where there's times where like my family's home and they're sleeping and I just want to blare an album to the point where it would shake the windows, and I can't.
Which stinks. Maybe they'll make a converter that we can add one onto our tables.
I think we should look into that, because if you think about it, there might be with the output jacks. It's
Right.
It's possible.
And I'm sure with the built-in preamp, it's got to be possible.
I would think so. So I think we should look into that.
So this album flowed extremely well from one song to the next. And I really enjoy that when one song ends and the next one kind of starts with the same melodies and the same sounds. I really, really enjoy that. And the fact that one song can end and the next begin without you knowing it is one thing that I think is really cool. So this album is definitely an experience, and it feels like a movie the entire time. The production is very well done and very impressive for an album from the early 70s. And I also thought that when there were lots of vocals being used, they were there for a reason. The mood of the music and the lyrics matched up very well, and I will preface the rest of my review saying that sometimes my attention span can be limited when it comes to music. Longer 5 to 8 to 10 minute songs can kind of lull me to sleep or make me not want to pay attention to the rest of it. So I tried very hard not to do that with this one, and James had told me, this is a listen to in one sitting album. This isn't a listen to half of it and come back to it as well. So I really tried on that one.
Yeah, I think you'd lose some of the magic.
Mm-hmm. So as far as talking points for the album, I think above anything else, it's an experience. James and I were talking a few days ago about how I could see back in the 70s, 80s, putting this on the table, lighting something up that may or may not be legal and kicking back to it.
It's legal in Michigan.
And how that could be just quite the experience. The song Money is my favorite on the album. It's very upbeat. The guitar work is very good, very smooth. It had kind of a jazzy feel and groove to it to me. And then the synthesizers at the beginning of Any Color You Like gave that song a very unique feel and sound as well. And the heartbeat at the end, it got me. It was really cool. And when you looped it together, the entire album, the heartbeat at the end matches up perfectly with the heartbeat at the beginning, which was awesome.
I'm sure that's probably fun when you could just put it on your headphones and just put it on repeat. Not something you can do with vinyl.
Yeah. And I will say that so all of these albums I listened to twice for a review. The first time on the table, the second time is typically on Spotify, or at least one of the times are on Spotify. So I did that with this album, and I picked up a few more things on Spotify, like the looping from the end to the beginning. So the other thing James told me I needed to look up when he gave this one to me was how the album fits with The Wizard of Oz. Did a little research on it. I haven't watched it through yet, but doing some research, the first time anyone suggested to do this that anybody could find was when the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette suggested it to their readers and suggested that the music and the movie fit together too well to be coincidence. According to them, if synced correctly, music will build up and hit peaks and fall along with the character movements. Loud crashes happen as someone falls and things like that. Now, I didn't try it out yet. James has told me there are people on YouTube who have done it, and it matches up crazy well.
Yeah, you can just watch it on YouTube and not have to set it all up.
Yeah, and people have asked the band about this in the past, and they kind of play it off as, no, how could we have done that intentionally? But there's no way, in my mind, that it wasn't done intentionally. Yeah. At least somewhat.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what song it is, but there's that airplane part where you hear the airplane flying. Mm-hmm. That literally cues up to when Dorothy walks out and she's like staring at the sky and she looks like she's following the airplane.
Right.
And then my other part that really stuck out to me was Money, like that really fun part of Money kicks in right when the Munchkins and everyone starts dancing. And it was just wow.
Yeah, there had to be some intent there.
Yeah, I don't know that it's 100% all of the time, but like there's a lot.
Right.
Yeah, and it's cool. It's real cool.
So down to the meat and bones of this. Now, I understand and respect the album as one of the greatest rock albums of all time, but I don't know if it's something that I would call one of my favorites, and maybe that's because I've only listened to it a couple times and I still need time to get into it and get
used to it. And you're not impaired.
Right. So this doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the album, because I definitely did. And for something to be one of my favorite albums, I need to be able to listen to it at any time, any day. And I think this is one you kind of need to be in a specific mood for, a specific frame of mind, and sit down and listen to it intently instead of just put it on and do stuff around the house.
Yeah, I don't think I could sit down and listen to that any other time than it being nighttime.
Right.
Yeah.
This could change. I mean, I've only listened to it a couple times now. It's definitely not an album I would have bought on my own because I like the music. It's an album I would have bought to have in my collection because I think every music collector, vinyl collector, should consider this a must-own. For those of you listening out there, take that as you will. If it's not your thing, it's not your thing.
Yeah, not everybody likes Pink Floyd. I spent a lot of years growing up not even giving them a chance. I, at one point, was a pretty hardcore Kiss fan. Still love them. And my uncle was a big Pink Floyd fan, and he would tell me constantly how much Kiss sucks and how much better Pink Floyd is. So that pretty much guaranteed I would never listen to them. And when I finally did and I started liking them, I never wanted to tell him that I liked it. I think he knows. I think he knows now.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So it's definitely an album I'm glad to have. I will get some playtime and get thrown into the rotation, but I don't think it'll be one of the most played in my collection. I also want to say that this album is definitely better when you listen to it on vinyl. I did it once on vinyl and once with my big over-ear headphones off my phone, and it just, something feels different and better when you listen to it on vinyl.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of depth of sound that you lose out on. I mean, and that's an old stereotype that every vinyl collector under their sun will tell you that, you lose so much when it's not on vinyl. I think this is one of the instances that's true.
So for me, so far in my early days of collecting, there are 2 albums that this happened to me with. Dark Side is one of them, and then Hotel California by the Eagles was another one that it just feels different when you put it on that table.
Another amazing album.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. So, James has a lot of incoming records
I do 14 of them.
just from one auction,
Yes, but Armando, I think, is taking this Sunday off, so
so it made up for it.
there you
Making
go.
up for lost time.
I do. So we're going to go over what we're recently listening to.
Yep.
All right.
So I just got my shipment of 5. I've been kind of going in streaks lately where I'll buy 3, 4 here. I'll take a week off. I'll watch the auction, but maybe not bid on anything.
Because he's responsible and he has self-control.
I try to be responsible. Sometimes I will admit the prices kind of scare me away a little bit. Not to say they're outrageous, but we have noticed instances where the bidding kind of gets out of hand for some records.
Let's talk about that for a second. All right. Let's talk about vinyl record auction etiquette. All right. So I want to make something clear. We've talked about Second Chance Records. They're amazing. And what we're about to talk about, I want to express to you that I have no ill will towards anybody
No,
there.
no,
This is
definitely
not
not.
the auctioneer's fault or anything like that. In fact, if you overpay, Armando takes real good care of you, and he gives you a bunch of extra records, filler records that you don't pick, but he tries to offset, what you just spent.
And he will straight up tell you that before you buy anything. He cuts bids off if they get too high. in
Right.
his
There's
mind.
still a record that I'm looking for that I was ready to run up because I wanted it that bad, called Logger's Daughter, and I accidentally recently bought the CD version of it. So that kills, and I don't own a CD player, so that just gutted me the other night when I
That
got home
hurts.
from the ER. But he'll cut it off. He'll cut off auctions. He doesn't want people overpaying on things and stuff. So here's the thing. So this has happened to me, and this has happened to Aaron as well. So recently, Aaron was bidding on a record. What was it called? Big Green?
I believe so.
Big Green, The Quiet Life. This is a indie band out of the Portland area, and it sounds kind of bluegrass. Okay, and it sounded great. Like I would buy it. And what happened, Aaron?
The price got a little out of hand.
Yeah, what was it? Like $42?
Something like that. Yeah.
Like if you go on
Now, we'll preface this by saying, what are there, 300 copies made, I think, total? Somewhere in that range, 200 to 300.
yeah,
So
it wasn't
it's not
many.
it's not like I'll be able to go to the store and buy this album.
I texted Aaron right then and there. I said, "You will never see this record again."
So for those, I don't mind paying a little more than what I'm comfortable with, knowing that that's not something that I will be able to get very easily anywhere. But there still comes a line at some point where I walk away from a record because for me, if it's not going to get playtime, I'm not going to buy it just to have it. I don't have a whole lot of interest in buying 400, 500, 600 records that I'm not going to play. And my collection is getting to the point where I will be up and over the 200 record mark.
He's
So
got.
I've
Matter
gotta
of
be a
fact, the
little-
record that I'm about to hand him here shortly is going to be
200.
number 200.
So I'm at the point where I'm being a little more selective with things and trying to buy records that I will play.
All right. So Aaron was bidding on this record, Big Green by The Quiet Life. That's the name of the band. And it's a small band. Like, I went on Discogs right after that, and I found a copy of this album, and I'm loading Discogs up right now and to try to find a copy of it. And I was like, it was $20. I'm not going to find it just because it's going to irritate me. And this gentleman, who will leave his name off, just ran Aaron up to like $42. Like, at that time, there were like 3 copies of it that you could have got for $20 with shipping on Discogs.
And we don't want to spread any ill will. Auctions are auctions. These
Right.
are how these things work. It's just please don't overpay for your records by astronomical amounts.
Right. And
Spending a little more to help a small buyer, yes, I understand that, and I'm typically willing to pay more to help out those small independent sellers.
Right.
But
I
there's
love Armando.
there's
Armando's great.
always a line You gotta set a max price for yourself. Say I will not go X high.
And don't run everybody up. Don't make the prices for other people who are just trying to fill up their collection so ridiculously high that they can't possibly afford to pay that record. Because honestly, I think you look silly. I think that you look silly and that you're just wasting money and you're making the experience not fun for other people.
I can't disagree with you. I can't disagree with you.
All right. Enough of that.
That being said, we still love the group.
We do.
We will continue to participate in auctions. We don't want to spread any ill will. Say what you want about us. We can take it.
Yeah.
That's just...
You can say we're whining. You can say we're complaining.
Venting our frustrations with some of them.
Correct.
That being said...
So what'd you get, Aaron?
The last auction that I did purchase things in, I got 5 albums. I got a new Busta Rhymes that was released in 2019. Sturgill Simpson Cutting Grass Volume 1, which I played for the first time the other night. It is an amazing album. I'm not a huge bluegrass fan, but my dad used to play a lot of it while we were kids. Ricky Skaggs was one that he played a lot.
So interesting thing about that Sturgill album.
Good music.
So essentially what he did was he took several of his songs that were popular and he now on his own record label re-recorded them from country style to bluegrass. So this is essentially a greatest hits album that he redid in bluegrass. And that was so cool.
It sounds good. I was just at the record store a little bit earlier today getting James's record for this show. And they had probably 7 or 8 copies of Volume 2 that just came out a month or so ago.
Some copies are blue on blue vinyl, so if that's something you like, I would go pick that up sooner or later.
I think all of the ones they had at the store were on blue vinyl.
Yeah, because eventually that'll just be back to regular black.
Well, and there is a colored version of Cutting Grass Volume 1 as well. I don't remember what color it is, but it's out there. I have the plain black version of it.
I'm sure it sounds just great.
It does. But I am a sucker for colored stuff. The other one I got was Faith Evans and Notorious B.I.G., The King and I, which is another good album. It kind of takes his...
Faith Evans, she's an R&B soul type of... Okay.
Yeah, so this kind of takes his hardcore songs and turns them more R&B, hip-hoppy instead of like gangster rap.
Was this done after he died?
I believe so. I think it's like a remix of his songs. And then I got a Dead President album. I haven't listened to that one yet, but I'm interested in that. And then the filler that I got is called Zome's Variations Volume 1. Now, I tried to find it on Spotify. Couldn't find it. I tried to find it on YouTube, and what I found were basically acoustic guitar instrumentals to kind of just chill out to. And I really enjoyed that, so I'm looking forward to spinning that. And then at the store today, I bought... what did I buy? I bought a couple country albums. I got a George Strait one, Old Dominion.
George Strait is what I often heard. Granted, I'm not a huge country guy. The king of country. He's like the Elvis of country is the way it's been explained to me.
I think that's a fair statement. And it's hard to find his stuff that aren't like greatest hit collections.
Yeah, that kills me. Aaron and I have talked about this in the past. We try not to buy greatest hits albums as much as we can, just because we like to appreciate the arrangement and mixing of a full album.
Right. And there are some artists that you can't find anything that's not a greatest hit.
Steve Miller is a good example of that. Steve Miller, you can only really find his new album solo, or you can find that really nice like greatest hits album with I forget what it's called, but it's like blue and it's got the horse on the front of it. Yeah. And then don't get me wrong, all great songs, and if you like greatest hits, that's cool.
Yeah. And then I got a Blink-182 Enema of the State, Disturbed, The Sickness, and then a Sir Mix-a-Lot, I'm a Trip, that I kind of took a chance on. I got for $10, and that's a trip for sure. For sure.
Sir Mix-a-Lot's great. All right, so my purchases, some of these are going to have been from the auction, and some of them are not. This particular auction that Aaron was in, I was working in the ER that night, so I really didn't get the bid, but I reached out to Armando afterwards and picked up some things that didn't sell or he didn't end up offering.
Oh, piggybacking on that, I have a Tribe Called Quest album coming in that I did the same thing on.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that one.
So despite my logger's daughter's mistake about getting a CD instead of a record, so that album will haunt me, I picked up 2 Wings albums. I got the 3 LP Wings Over America. I happened to be at the exclusive company. I found a copy that was absolutely in wonderful shape, had the poster, had everything. Not a single pop on the record, not a scratch on it, and I paid like $19 for it. And I don't mind paying a little bit more, but I felt that was a good deal. $19 for a 3 LP in perfect condition.
Yeah, you can't find that too much.
Yeah.
You're hard pressed to find a 2 LP set for under $20.
Correct. And then I got a copy of Band on the Run, also a classic Wings album, in really wonderful shape. I want to say I paid like $14 for that, but because it was in such good shape, I didn't bother me.
This used section is one section that I really have to start utilizing again.
Yeah, that day I went in there and I told Aaron, I'm like, there's a lot of stuff in here that you would want. There was a Bad Company album that I almost bought that was in great shape. And then I did find probably, in my mind, one of the most iconic soul albums ever made, Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On.
I was wondering how long it would take you to buy that. Last time I was at the store, I actually almost bought that for you.
Oh, yeah, I found that and I was like, and it's also in amazing shape. And I was like, oh baby, I need this. I have to have this in my life.
I think that's another iconic album that is almost a must-own for people.
Yeah, I have that and What's Going On that I bought new on 180 gram a while ago, but Let's Get It On. And I listened to it. The whole album's wonderful. My mother bought me the 1984 release of Deep Purple's Perfect Strangers, which, I was a little skeptical about listening to an 80s album, but there were definitely a few songs on there that I actually recognized, one of which being Knocking at Your Back Door. I'm not going to sing it to you right now, but I think if you're a classic rock fan, you'd probably know it. I got a UK pressing of Alice in Wonderland. That was for my wife. I do have a American Disney pressing, but that popped up and I got it for her just because she loves Alice in Wonderland. Bruno Mars's debut album, Doo-Wop and Other Hooligans on Orange.
I love me some Bruno Mars.
I think anybody who doesn't like Bruno Mars is lying.
Yeah.
So he's got a couple classics on there. Grenade, Just the Way You Are, Marry You, just some really iconic songs. And Bruno, if you're listening, because we know you love our podcast, you need to give us a date for that Silk Sonic album.
Yes.
I want to buy. I like 5 copies.
Their performance at the Grammys was awesome. I'm very, very excited for that one.
I also got Bo Diddley's Have Guitar Will Travel. Admittedly, the reason I got that because he's riding a moped on the cover, and I just love mopeds. And then I got a replacement copy of Alice Cooper's Killer, the copy that I have. I got years and years ago, and it's autographed, but it's not really in a condition that you can listen to. Alice actually held it. This was when vinyl was dead in the ground. He held it, looked at it, and went, I haven't seen one of these in years. And then one of his guys ushered me along quickly because I was in line. And then my 2 fillers, I got Shirley Bassey's Never, 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 which really the extent of my Shirley Bassey knowledge consisted of her James Bond themes. She did have an interesting cover of Killing Me Softly with his song, which I know from Roberta Flack, and then also Lauryn Hill covered it as part of her song off that Fugees album I was talking about earlier. And then I got this really interesting album that I didn't know what to think of called by Joe Pass. It's Joe Pass and Robert Kahn, and it's essentially an album of really light acoustic guitar, which was insanely relaxing, and I really loved it for some reason.
So some of these fillers are kind of hidden gems in their own right.
Oh yeah.
I recently got Nancy Sinatra, is that her name?
Correct.
And then a Todd Rundgren album that, they were my fillers, and I kind of ushered them to James because I know he would play them a lot more than I would.
That Todd Rundgren album, Todd Rundgren's Utopia, was actually really interesting. It's kind of, I don't know how to put it, like 80s ELO.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. Then I got 14 coming, one of which was John Fogerty's Centerfold. Red Hot Chili Peppers' Californication, Twisted Sister, Casey and the Sunshine Band, and a copy of Hank Williams' 40 Greatest Hits on Music on Vinyl, which is a real high quality copy. And if you know Hank Williams, he died at a relatively young age due to drugs and alcohol. And he really only had about 40 songs that he had released.
He was in his mid-20s.
29. He had recently had Hank Williams Jr. But this really is going to pretty much be everything of Hank's for the most part. So I got a couple of those I'm looking forward to. I think they're either going to be here today or tomorrow. And I need to put some of them away before my wife sees how many I bought.
It's funny to look at the size of my box versus the size of James's box when they show up. Typically.
And honestly, I'm a nurse. I'm working full time, and this is the most money I've made in my entire life.
Yeah.
I'm not incredibly in debt, and this is a hobby I really enjoy, and I could definitely be spending money on worse things like drugs.
For sure. And
so if you need me to enable you in any way to buy more records, please be sure to follow us at One More Record Podcast on Twitter or One More Record Podcast at Gmail, and I will send you a personalized message telling you all the reasons that you should buy records.
Neither of us will ever tell you no.
No.
We may sway you one way or the other, but we will never explicitly say no.
No, absolutely not. We will enable you to the bitter end. So, all right, ready to present each other with records. Hey, question for you. Do you want to give initial impressions? I know we didn't do that last time.
We can.
You know what? We got some advice.
I think initial impressions is okay.
Yeah, we got some advice. Someone saying our podcast was a little long and, suggested that we cut this out. But you know what? We make the podcast that we want to listen.
We make the rules.
Exactly.
So,
you going to give me mine first?
Yeah, the album that I got for you is somebody you've been listening to for a long time.
I have been?
Yep.
All right.
I know this for a fact. It's his newer album that you and I have kind of talked about multiple times on multiple occasions. Any guesses before I give it to you?
No.
And I'm really, really hoping that you haven't bought it for yourself yet, because I'll be very disappointed.
I'll tell you right now, it'll be an embarrassing moment.
Yeah.
No, I have no guess. I talk about a lot of random people.
So I bought Alice Cooper Detroit Stories for you.
Oh, I'm excited about this. I haven't bought this lately.
And if you remember in a couple episodes ago when I talked about how there were two albums that I wanted to get for James, and I said pick the number one or the number two, this was the other of those two.
So just a little bit of explanation. I may have mentioned this. It's on Redbubble. So as you may have noticed a few minutes ago, I love Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper is the OG of shock rock. Like, this guy was just doing crazy stuff when everybody else was being kind of bland. Mm-hmm. And little known fact, Frank Zappa actually saw him and saw that he was driving people out of the performance, like, just because he was so over the top and crazy, that's why he ended up signing Alice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and without Alice Cooper, we wouldn't have had, Kiss. We wouldn't have a lot of really big rock bands. Like, there wouldn't be Twisted Sister. I don't think that there would be any hair metal.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think we would have any hair bands without Alice.
And I don't know if it's the full album, but I will research this before the review. But my understanding is that several songs on here he did with most of the original Alice Cooper band.
I think so.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the whole album. And then there's this interesting thing where they basically, one of these songs, they bitch about each other on it as a way of venting. And then
I think that's hilarious.
Yeah. I'll do some research about it and we'll talk about it.
And then from what I've been able to research, this is an indie record store kind of exclusive album too. This wasn't like mass release.
I'm excited about this.
I figured you would be. I know it's not something that we, this is new to you. Here, go listen to this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when we originally started doing this, the goal was more to review things that were new to us. But we make the rules again.
Right.
And this is something I haven't listened to. Like, I haven't listened to this, so it's in the spirit of what we're doing. It's fair.
And I know in trips to the store in the past, we both have kind of looked at it, talked about it, and you've never gotten it for yourself.
I think I've listened to one song off
your comment was always, oh, I might have to get that at some point. So that's why I figured
Yeah,
I'd pick that up.
I'm extremely excited about that. So Detroit Stories. Detroit's the home of rock and roll and a lot of the rap that Aaron loves. A lot of major bands really came out of Detroit. Alice still having some very big love for the Motor City. Made this album as an homage. So what we have on the front is what I'm assuming is a Detroit skyline. We have lights coming out of the ground. We see in the air kind of bat signal-esque Alice's signature painted eyes. And then on the back we got Alice in kind of a top hat wearing that same makeup. Looks amazing. I cannot wait to get home and listen to this.
I figured that might put it on today even record for you.
Oh, I think that's probably the case. Yeah. So Aaron, I know I just kind of came out and I got you a rock album last time, a classic rock album, and before that I got you some kind of like indie band kind of stuff with the J.D. McPherson, and that's great. But there's an element to your collection that I thought that you were missing, and that's a little bit
disco.
No, that's not
Okay,
this.
thank
I
God.
told Aaron I was going to buy him, and my wife likes to encourage me to make trouble, which I don't need help in being encouraged to do that. Wanted me to buy him the Disco Mickey album, which Aaron
I
admitted.
would have been okay with that.
I played him a sample of it via text message, and he had said he liked it. So I thought about it. I'm not going to lie.
To which James's response was, "Are you being serious?"
Yeah.
I'm like, yes. Yeah, that sounded good.
I buy Disney records mostly for my kid.
Right.
So anyway, so there's soul. I think you need a little bit of soul. I know that you also like country. So this next album will be described as soul country to you. And I would say since I've started to collect records, this is absolutely hands down probably one of my favorite records that I've bought. And it is in my heavier rotation. This is something that I frequently play. Any guesses?
I don't know. I do not know. Okay.
What did I give you?
Yola's Walk Through the Fire. Huh.
Yeah, I happen
Yeah,
to.
this is something I definitely wouldn't have gone and bought for myself. That's for sure.
Yeah, so Yola is an artist that is presently on Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys record label. And then he was heavily involved in the producing and the sound of this album. And I don't think there's a bad song on this album.
So, for those of you listening, if you're still here at this point, the cover looks very 60s, 70s to me, just with the way the script is, the coloring. It's her and an acoustic guitar.
There's an insert in there that also is very 60s and
Is it?
70s. Yep.
She's got a pink backdrop behind her, and it's just her vibing out to the music.
There's only one complaint I'll say about this album. She did a cover of Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road,
Okay.
and then that is available on the CD version of this album,
Sure.
but not on the record,
Okay.
which upsets me. And she's got a new album coming out in May if you like this.
Yeah, this is going to be something that's new for me, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I love the simplicity of the look and the feel.
Yeah, I will be shocked if you don't enjoy this record.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I love that record.
I almost went country for your pick today.
Yeah.
I almost did. It's close.
Yeah, no, you did good. Oh, and then this is not part of Aaron's selection. However, I recently received a 12-inch single and one of my orders from one of the other members of the Second Chance vinyl group of Jimmy Cliff. On one side, it has the song called Special, and on the other side is Peace Officer. Like, the one side's just a straight up jam the whole way through, and I thought this was more of Aaron's
I do enjoy some Jimmy Cliff.
Yeah,
There's been a couple of auctions where I've tried to get Jimmy Cliff, and then I get beaten out.
Yeah, it's very reggae-ish, and I finally got around to listening to this. I'm like, this is something Aaron probably would.
I don't have any singles in my collection yet either, so
there you
that's
go.
Something new for me as well.
Album 200 and album 201.
Yeah, that's a big milestone. What are you up to now?
Not,
Do we want to disclose this number?
Yeah, my wife doesn't listen to this podcast, so I think we'll be okay.
Oh, Chelsea, that hurts. Like a lot.
So, of course, Discogs is going to be trouble. So, not counting this record that Aaron just presented me, and not counting the 14 I have coming in the mail, I am at 297. And that does count my 7-inch Gremlins books that I got. Just bought them purely because it was reminded me of my childhood, and then a couple other singles that I have.
Okay.
So
I'm catching you.
You are.
James also had one other purchase recently.
Oh.
That he went down to IKEA for.
So there are certain moments in any vinyl collector's life that are kind of monumental. One is getting the turntable, getting your speakers, getting a crate of some. Oh, I should have brought you one of those crates. And then I went down and I bought a 16 cube Kallax system, which if you are not familiar with, IKEA has a line of Kallax storage system, which are one of the most common things that record collectors will use to store their records.
We have also found them at Target if you don't have an IKEA near you.
Right, I had to drive 2 hours to get down there. It was quite large. It takes up a huge portion of my wall. Then I also mounted my grandfather's, who's been deceased for a while, his acoustic guitar on the ceiling above it.
Oh, that is really cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It looks pretty good. I'm very happy with it. This thing will hold approximately 1,250 records.
So a year.
Yeah,
2
so
years.
that should get me through next year.
Yeah.
Actually, I did the calculation. If I continued buying records at the rate that I am, it would be about 4.5 years.
Yeah.
So,
Are you at the 2-year mark yet?
a little over a year.
A little over a year. Okay.
Because I got my table last summer.
Ah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I don't know, maybe 2 years. I don't know. I try not to think about it.
Okay. So that's what we've got for you guys today.
Thanks for stopping by.
I know it was a little longer than our typical episodes, but we were trying some new things out today.
Thanks for listening.
Let us know what you think about the new microphone, the new intro music. If you've got any topic suggestions, ideas, complaints about us venting a little earlier.
We would love to hear from you. So if you want to interact with us, you want to read us a message, you got an experience about collecting, you got a tip for collectors, whatever you want to talk about, as long as you're respectful, we'll read it.
The other thing is we would like to know if anybody would be interested in a video version of the podcast. Maybe it could be a condensed, trimmed down version. We could venture into YouTube or other media if that would be the case. We're open to ideas, suggestions, thoughts. If it's something you wouldn't watch, you could say, hey, you guys are dumb, don't do videos, whatever you feel.
And then we think perhaps maybe next time for our next records, we're toying around with the idea of going to an antique mall and only buying each other something used, just to kind of force us out, open up the wide world of possibilities.
Yeah, those antique malls have hidden gems all over the place.
Stuff that's way out of print.
Yep.
Way out of print. So again, thank you for stopping by listening. Make sure you interact with us on Twitter if you like. We promise we won't blow your feet up too much. And also you can hit us up at our Gmail account that we mentioned earlier. So you have a good night.
You have a good night. There's always more vinyl.